Welcome to Conversations About Construction. I'm Dave Trafford. This podcast is produced and presented by the Residential and Civil Construction Alliance of Ontario. Members of the Alliance build your homes. They build your transportation networks and the systems that deliver safe, clean drinking water to your kitchen sink. This series will focus on industry innovations and solutions that support sustainable economic development and Ontario's world-class standard of living. In this episode, Timber Talk, building major infrastructure with mass timber. Our guests are Mike Yorke. He's the president of the Carpenters District Council of Ontario and a director of the Residential and Civil Construction Alliance of Ontario. We're also joined by Stephen Street, a mass timber and wood products business consultant who does business development and project sales for Moses Structural Engineers. Mike, let's start with you because, we talk about standing the economy back up, unlocking economies across the country.
Right.
Clearly, we're looking at construction being an important part of that. We're going to talk in another episode about infrastructure and how we're not going to be able to overlook it as being a driving force to reinvigorating and resetting the economy. But I guess, at your level, you got guys on the front line right now who are literally frontline workers in all of this to make sure that the economy gets back into shape.
That's absolutely correct. As you are aware, the construction industry was deemed to be an essential service. And primarily that meant that the residential carried on. However, the commercial section was shut down for a couple of weeks, but there were transit projects, hospital projects, healthcare, university projects that carried on throughout COVID. And then we also had a lot of workers that had to go into food stores, retail stores, and put up the plexiglass screens. So it actually generated a real need for almost emergency service on a number of these projects. So throughout the course of the crisis, we were almost full employed. We're now back to full employment. But I guess in general, the answer to your query would be, the construction industry is a real driver for the economy of Canada, and we're proud to play a role as essential service workers. It's important.
Do you have an idea, ballpark, what kind of numbers are there in terms of those jobs, whether it's just in Ontario or right across the country?
Well, from our perspective, we're probably looking at about 13,000 fully employed carpenters, drywallers in the GTA alone.
Wow.
So across the country, it's literally, if you look at a number of the different trades, you're probably talking close to 500,000 workers, in the construction industry.
Yeah, and I guess, Stephen, that's the whole point of this is that, it's easy to overlook the economic effect of not just the buildings that are going up, but you're talking about that many employees and that many workers. You multiply that by the number of people who benefit from it, whether it's their direct family or people using that money to buy other services. The construction and infrastructure is going to be critical to moving this thing forward.
Yeah, I found that it was really a positive thing to see tower cranes still moving during the sort of lockdown period that we had. I think the municipalities did a great job at supporting wherever a building permit was issued prior to the shutdown. Those workers were allowed to go in and actually continue building. So whether it's high-rise building or whether it's the lower-rise single-family home, multi-family home projects, as long as a permit was issued prior to the shutdown, they were able to go in and work. So there's so much attached to that. It's not just the frontline workers that are in there swinging hammers and putting the buildings up. Again, might mention drywallers, all the follow-on trades were able then to go into work. And I think, it took a few weeks for people to sort of understand how they were going to do that work. And I think that's been something that health and safety people inside of companies have had to deal with. We don't want to put our workers at risk, obviously. But it sort of goes back to our real need and appetite for good, affordable housing in the province and across the country. And I think, this is where sort of timber plays a great role. This is why we put the show together today. And this is why, it's inspiring to know that as we start to unlock the the province and the country, construction really is at the forefront of that. And I think it's been great for people to see at least there's some kind of activity happening, even though the majority of us are locked down. But now it's actually starting to open up, as Mike says. Everyone's going back to work, which is such a positive thing.
And Dave, I might just add to that, because I think Stephen gave a good overview. It's that as we come out of COVID, so in a post-COVID economy, I think construction can play a leading role in revitalization of the general economy, as Steve had mentioned. So you've got design, you've got trucking, you've got manufacturing beyond just the construction site. So I think there's an opportunity for the industry to really shine in the absence of so many other areas where there's maybe a need for traction, but the construction industry can provide that traction for many other industries.
All right, so let me get to the point, and Stephen alluded to it already. It was that, about 2 weeks ago, I guess, at least a couple of weeks on the date that we're recording this show, we got word that Sidewalk Labs was going to pull out of its agreement here in Toronto. They are no longer going to develop that section of waterfront. Don't necessarily want to talk to you about that specifically, but do want to get to the notion, and this surprised me when I first started following that story, that they were going to be using mass timber for much of the construction on that site. And I think that, Mike, it turned a lot of heads, because we would have thought, in this new era, and we're talking about smart, digitally data-driven neighborhoods now, it's all about steel and wire, that we were a little surprised that it was going to be, a major part of their construction and design was actually going to include, wood framing for buildings.
Well, I think they were all about innovation and new ideas and new technology, and whether it's in living relationships and community relationships, and certainly the data aspect, kind of a high-speed internet-based community was a part of that, but so was new ideas around old technologies and old processes, right? So that's where mass timber came in. It wasn't just a 2x4 stick building. It was really the whole concept of manufactured wood, new, stronger technology. And I think they were really looking at it as an innovative practice, and really carving out some space for the community they wanted to build, but also it allowed, to be candid with you, I think it really allowed Ontario and the GTA a huge opportunity to participate in new ideas around community living, whether that's the structural side or the innovation, and then the relationships with the KW, Kitchener-Waterloo, the high-tech corridor. So there were a lot of aspects that we were very interested in the Quayside development.
But when we look at the actual use of mass timber on that site, what's the benefit?
Cross-laminated timber was developed in Europe, some 20 years ago between the forestry and the wood-producing industry and academia. So what it really did is it sort of acted as a catalyst to unlock really potential in our wood buildings. And as Mike sort of said, we're not talking about, stick-built 2x4 framing anymore. We're talking about big, heavy slabs of wood. And what it really did is it unleashed a whole bunch of research and development into mass timber products. Now, cross-laminated timber is always the poster child. It's the one that gets most of the press and the activity from the media. But mass timber as a subject matter is a whole bunch of other structural systems, all being used now globally and more in North America at unlocking potential in buildings and the impact of that. Now, the code has sort of driven us down the path of, energy conservation, because I think it's about between 40 and 50% of all of our energy use is in operational for buildings. So that's where our energy goes. So what wood tends to do then is it plays a major role because of the carbon capture within the element itself of timber. There's a carbon sequestering that, in the growth of timber through photosynthesis, etc. But what the big thing is coming is embodied energy. So it's looking not just at the carbon that's sequestered in the material, but actually the embodied energy within the building materials inside that project. And that's the hidden one.
So explain, just stop there because I want to make sure I understand that. So explain that part of that component of it.
So embodied energy is really, it's the energy held within the material itself. So this comes from the extraction, the processing, the shipping, the installation. So it's looking at the whole picture. So if you can think about capturing the carbon element inside of a building within wood, and then look at it, well, we're using wood, but we also haven't used something else. So that's another hidden message behind the whole thing. And that's what's most exciting. So this is what the world's waking up to. It's that carbon footprint of buildings as a whole. And that's where the future is. So the R&D has unlocked not just uses for mass timber construction, but it's unlocked connection, technology, etc. So we have the science now to sort of say, if we build something that's 8 stories high, it's 12 stories high, it's 16 stories high, we've got the design, the engineering expertise, and the design professionals that can make this happen. And then we need the trades to make it happen. So this is where Mike's groups come in with their education.
Dave, the other point that I wanted to add to Steve's comment is that when you ask the question, what are the benefits of wood, let's say on Toronto waterfront, it's also what it means to beyond Toronto. So part of our argument was what that really meant for manufacturing in Ontario, to set up and establish CLT manufacturers, mass timber manufacturers, and also what it meant to our resource-based communities in Northern Ontario, Aboriginal communities around economic prosperity and development of various a more diversified economy in the north, and so we saw benefits there as well.
Yeah, I guess that's interesting because we go back to being, the harvesting that timber is an industry in and of itself, but also to Stephen's point, growing the supply actually has the offset too in the environment.
Yes.
So there's benefit here that we can easily point to. How hard has it been to pull that thread through to make sure that everybody understands that? Because it makes sense when you say that, but I can see where some people are still going to have to be convinced, Steve, that this is resilient enough, that it's got the it's going to. You talk about the codes already, how that they're going to accommodate for it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think typically we build about 90% of our residential developments with wood. So these provide us with our housing stock, etc., that we typically live in. What the mass timber world and the evolving mass timber usage across the globe has done is it's made us reinvest time in our building stock that we have. So if you take most of our inner city cores, for example, and that's how cities are built, they build around a core and then they move outwards. Most of the inner cities in North America have post and beam buildings, some 6, 8, 9 stories in height. We always used to build our buildings like this, post and beam, brick and beam, block and beam, etc. type buildings. And they're the ones that are most sought after. You can't get tenancy and leasing of office space in Toronto in these buildings because that's where people want to live and invest and work. So that's one point. So what it's done is it's woken the design community up to thinking about this. And it's saying, what are we going to do with this? So the codes work typically quite slowly because they've got a lot of things, checks and balances that they have to do. So what the code is doing now, it's going through this evolutionary process to allow buildings to work this way using mass timber. So the code is built up of a series of objectives around occupant safety, fire safety, structural, etc. There's no lessening of this for wood buildings. They still have to go through the checks and balances and the performance that every other material does, whether it's plastic, steel, concrete, wood, anything goes through those objectives. And that's what's happening. The code is catching up with the research and development that's been done over the years for the last sort of 10 to 15, 20 years. And now the code is now evolving to allow this to start happening.
So, Mike, when we talk about the changes in the code, though, and just call changing that kind of code slow, I think is probably being polite as far as many municipalities are concerned. How much of that has required a real eye contact discussion with the administrators at municipality to municipality, or is there a role there, I guess, for the province to be looking at this and saying, being a champion for all intents and purposes for this mode of construction?
Okay, well, in all candor, I think Steve is the best individual suited to answer this specific question because he's done a hell of a lot of work on the lobbying, on the expertise, on all the data in order to make those changes to the code. Our role as the Carpenters has been to be a supporter when required and when needed to kind of put our shoulder to the wheel in terms of support for changes. But if you really look at the folks that have done the actual stick handling, Steve is really one of those individuals for sure.
Yeah, we with my past life when I was working with the Canadian Wood Council with the Woodworks program, we there was a tremendous amount of work that went to move the code from 4 stories, which it was for many years, up to 6 stories, which is the allowable height for stick-built wood buildings. That's great, but it really didn't unlock the potential that mass timber to go much higher. As we've seen, many buildings, the Sidewalks Lab you've already mentioned, were going up to 20 plus stories in height, and there's lots of examples of those globally. So, like I said, the code is a slow process because it's groups of people, research, etc., that all has to be digested to come up with how the code is going to move forward. The interesting thing that sort of Mike alluded to about Northern Ontario, where we grow our wood across the boreal forest across the north, basically, that goes across many provinces, it connects the environment ministries with natural resources and forestry, which is the ministry that's responsible for forest stewardship, making sure the sustainable harvesting rules are adhered to on the Crown land, which is the majority of the harvest from timber is done on. Northern development and economic developing ministries within the government. And then it comes down to the code agencies, which are under the umbrella of the housing and municipal affairs. So the good thing about this is it stitches many of the ministries together to sort of say, if you open up this, it's going to have the vibrancy in the north through the forest-dependent communities. It's going to come down to the south where the market is. And this is where the knock-on effect is like the lumber, the manufacturing, the processing of the timber may be done in the north, and let's hope that they get some mass timber manufacturing in the north. Otherwise, the materials comes down to the south where there's factories, the things are put together, and then the erection process then takes place with the carpenters. So there's so many very, very positive things that are going to come from as we unlock the mass timber world that are very exciting not just to the carpenters, but the design community as well. We're able to now think about buildings quite differently and what the possibilities are, and that's the next chapter.
Just before we leave that point, and I don't, in any stretch of the imagination, and I find myself saying this often, nobody is cheering for a pandemic. Having said that, I wonder whether, I'd be curious for both of your points of view on this, whether this time in history provides us with the opportunity to accelerate the acceptance of mass timber, the use of mass timber, the regulations around mass timber to make sure that there is that economic growth, to make sure that there is that environmental impact, that perhaps we're at a point in history where, if we hadn't had this happen to us, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Okay, Steve, I'll just jump in. It's an interesting question, and I think some of the kind of the weaknesses in our economy have been laid bare by this pandemic. And even the Premier of Ontario has said that we've got to start supporting more of our local industries and local, either resources or the local economy. So whether that means on Main Street, or does that mean on manufacturing in Ontario and to bring a lot of that manufacturing base back and to build it up, and also our resource extraction? So I think some of like I said, I guess my sense is that there's been weaknesses exposed in our economy, and how do we address that going forward? And I tend to agree with the Premier when he says, we need to support Ontario industry and Ontario economy, and he's called us a manufacturing powerhouse. well, then let's put that into action right now on the mass timber sector.
Mm-hmm. Steve?
Absolutely, and I echo what Mike said. And I think we've got a chance. We've hit the reset button, and I think we need to reset. I think we need to recalibrate how we do things. I think the manufacturing base is strong here. It could be a lot stronger, and I think we've got an opportunity here to really put Ontario first. That's just I feel that we've got all the resources, and resources typically are the thing that sort of hinders this. We have the resources in this province. We're very rich. We have a lot of the great forest cover, and we have a high strength fiber in our forests in the north. We just need to do something with it, and I think the time's right. We're never going to have a better opportunity for the government to step up and sort of say, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're going to be the driver now. We're going to invest in our technologies and our industry because the market's here. We've got the market. The Americans as well are waking up to mass timber. We've got a phenomenal opportunity to drive our exports from Ontario. It's just the way I think we need to capitalize on this opportunity. It's happened. There's no denying that. And now we have to really, really push forward.
That only works, though, if we make sure that the timber we harvest in this country is processed and manufactured for construction purposes, though, right?
I've had the opportunity to work with the folks from Woodworks and the Canadian Wood Council, and we've been to Austria, Northern Italy. And what I like to do is say that there's benchmarks out there. There's existing communities, smaller communities in those countries where economic prosperity has really been driven by the forestry sector. And then as Stephen said, then you tie that into your academia, your community colleges, your design schools, and you tie that into your manufacturing base, and you're taking resource extraction and then really developing wealth from processing that resource. And those benchmarks do exist in the world. And I think what we need to do in Ontario is take a look at that and the best practices and say, we can emulate that and we can create wealth in our own communities here in this province.
Yeah, I guess the point being as well, Stephen, that we were looking at the environmental effects, the economic effects, but we shouldn't be leaving stuff on the table. So if we're going to do this and support a whole new stream of manufacturing, that's got to be part of the equation if we really want to make the most of the opportunity.
Absolutely. We've got some new processing plants that should be online later this year, early next year as well, which are Ontario driven. Ontario workers are involved in it. We've got the design community that are chomping at the bit to buy local. They're having to go outside of the province because maybe the materials aren't available here. I always think that you need to have the appetite. You need to have people feeling hungry for this. That work's already been done. The appetite's there, and now we need to feed them. And if we can do it locally with our high-strength fiber, which we have in this province, it's all sustainably forest managed because it's crown land, which the timber comes off. So there's strict rules in place that you don't over-harvest, etc. All the parts are in place. Now we just have to work on the processing side and actually getting that product down here where the market is and actually used. So it's exciting. It's a very exciting phenomenon. We're in a good position, and this is a good problem to have right now.
Yeah, I want to get to a question about just specifically around the Carpenters and jobs and training in a minute, Mike, but I just want to come back to your point around the fiber. Explain to me what makes the product that we can harvest in Ontario a higher quality of timber than you might get otherwise in the world.
It's the species of trees that we have in our forests up north. We've got spruce, pine, fir, etc. The harvest of the trees that gives us high strength fiber. It's the processing. It's the way the trees grow. We don't have the luxury of having a continuous growth cycle. We have quite wicked weather in the winter here. But our tree fiber, the species of trees that we have, are incredibly strong. And they can be used and utilized. This is the same sort of fiber that they use in Europe for cross-laminated timber and mass timber production. There's nothing that's different here than it is other places. We just need to get the processes in place. We need that that start. And there are, as I mentioned, a couple of operations that are coming on locally, which should be under production capacity probably within the end of the year. And that's exciting because we can design them locally, and now we can actually supply them locally too.
So, Mike, I just want to go back because when we make this shift in the medium of building, if you will, what kind of shift do you need to make in terms of training the carpenters? Whether it's educating them at a younger age, how do you transform some of the old guys like us that are going to have to learn new tricks? Is there capacity or urgency around that right now?
I'll put it this way: for the older generation, that might not happen. I'll tell you, when our younger apprentices find out that we're doing courses and we're looking at this industry, the mass timber industry, incredible excitement. So that's the kind of feedback that we have from the younger generation. Very excited about the potential, what it means, how do they get onto the job, what role can they play. So that's a great base to start from for us. But I will say that training the next generation has been part of the carpenters and the trade unions for hundreds of years. So it's part of our raison d'etre. So we have this next generation that need to learn the skills, need to know how things go together, but need to also know how to do things in a safe and practical way. So job site safety is incredibly important. And likewise, when we're doing our mass timber training, currently we have a 4-week training program, and the first week is really all about job site health and safety. When you're lifting the panels and the CLT panels that Steve has been speaking about, we know that these are hundreds or thousands of pounds in some cases, 20, 30 feet long, a foot thick, 8 feet wide. So they're massive pieces of material that you have to put into place in a safe manner. So that's a key component. And then, of course, it's all new, a lot of new technologies, new fastening systems, new mechanisms to put these pieces together. So training curve is very, very important. And so that is a part of our approach to the industry.
Yeah, and I think that's easily lost in the discussion if we're not paying attention to it. It's great to have all that, whether it's technology or the new medium, unless we're really focused on promoting the innovation through thoughtful training, then, it's just an idea. It's not really something that we're executing.
And one thing I will add to that, the carpenters do not operate in a vacuum. It's not just us and our idea. No, we partner up. We collaborate with other expert leaders in the industry. So folks like Steve, or the design community, architects like Marco Vandermaas, or engineers like David Moses, and other kind of thought leaders like folks at Woodworks Ontario, Canadian Wood Council. So we really integrate a broad approach to the sector, and we say, okay, what can we take from others that have done the groundwork before us, and how do we then integrate that into our own training program? So when we've done our classes with our students, we've had someone like architect Michael Green come in and do a presentation to up to 100 students. So they're learning, our next generation, in many cases, they're learning from the best and the best in the world. So we want to be able to provide that type of training to them so that when they go to the field, they are excelling, but they're also waving the banner, waving the flag for our organization, so that the buyer of construction knows that they're getting the best as well.
What's really interesting on that point is that there's many projects coming forward now with the higher learning. So colleges and universities are investing in this technology. They're looking at mass timber buildings as being a teaching tool that they can actually point and sort of say, well, this is the reason why this has been designed and built this way. This is the material that's been used. And there actually curriculum development around mass timber use is happening. How many projects, Mike, are coming through now? Probably at least, I would say, 8 to 10 in the next 2 years. And this is high learning. So
I think, in that sense, it's very exciting. And the potential's there. So I almost feel like we're just kind of scratching the surface on the potential. but it makes it easier when there are examples out there. Then it makes it easier for folks like myself or Steve to go out to the broader community, the buyers of construction and others, and say, look, there are some benchmarks that we can take a look at. Let's look at the best and see how we can involve that and implement that even in our own context of Ontario.
Yeah, it's just to sort of do hackneyed on an old saying, but you were able to see the solution, but for the trees. I mean, in this case, because we've got old product, old medium here for building. That it seems just funny to me how we have to be convinced that this might be a good thing to use to build buildings.
Yeah, we've been building with wood since forever, right? So we should know it. This is the next advancement of it. This is taking the technologies, the software modeling, processing, etc., really bringing wood into the 2020s and beyond. So it kind of makes sense. It's an exciting field to be in.
Yeah. Last thought from both of you, Mike, just on what we should take away from this.
Well, I think maybe to go back to the beginning of our discussion that, we're in a scenario right now where we have this huge potential in front of us, but we have massive challenges. We're coming out of a pandemic, and then how do we make sure that economic prosperity is driven, and how do we make sure that it finds its way to support as many people as possible in our communities, because a lot of people are hurting. And this is, for me, this is only one example of what we could explore, but I think it's a real potential for the province of Ontario.
Steve?
There's so much to explore, Dave. I've been a wood guy my entire life. I've always loved it. I've loved the benefits of being around it. I think we should be exploring not just home building, office building, etc. We should be building our schools with it. Japan builds their schools for children out of wood because it gives them a natural environment and they seem to learn better. Maybe there's a lot of other areas we need to explore through biophilic design, using a natural material. There's no reason why we can't do this, and we need to be supplying it with Ontario wood and timber.
Well, a fascinating conversation. I wouldn't have thought that I would be having a 30-minute interview about the use of wood for building and that I would learn something, but I have learned something from both of you. So Mike Yorke and Stephen Street, thanks for this.
Thanks very much, Dave. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to Conversations About Construction, and we'd encourage you to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts and share it with your network. Conversations About Construction is produced for the Residential and Civil Construction Alliance of Ontario by iContact Productions. I'm Dave Trafford.